Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology. Happy solstice to everybody out there. We're looking at the summer solstice in the Northern Hemisphere right now. And today we're going to talk about the meaning of the sun in the sign of Cancer, as well as that pivotal solstice point that's built into the archetypal language of the zodiac. I get a ton of questions about it every time that it comes around, whether it's the summer solstice or the any of the equinoxes or solstices in general. So I always like to do a video refreshing on it. Those of you who've watched my channel for a while will probably recognize, some of these teachings because I've done videos on some of this in the past. But before I dive in, I want to bring up the real time clock and talk a little bit about what kind of astrology is coming through this week and what we'll be taking a look at in advance. And then we'll talk in particular about the summer solstice. So here you can see that the sun has just ingressed about half a degree into the sign of Cancer. So that 0 degree marker of Cancer marks the solstice, the summer solstice, we call it here in the Northern Hemisphere. This week there's another video that Kat and I recorded, a Q&A episode called Do You Need to Flip the Zodiac for the Southern Hemisphere? And the answer to that in the video that I made is you certainly can, but you also don't have to. And so for those people who are watching this immediately going like, hey, wait, I'm in Australia and it's not the summer solstice down here. Hopefully this week we will actually address that question about whether or not to flip the zodiac in general. So stay tuned for more on that. In the meantime, we're going to talk about the archetypal and sort of mythological dimensions of this summer solstice point, the sign of Cancer, the moon. The sign of Cancer is also the exaltation of Jupiter. So we're going to talk about those things today, give you a little deeper understanding of what this temple of the zodiac is all about and why this turning point is so pivotal within the underlying metaphysics of astrology. Now, at the same time, this week, a couple of other things coming up. Today, Venus is in a trine with Neptune, and Venus is also moving into the opposition with Pluto. Now, I did a video on this last Friday, I believe it was, on Venus's trine to Neptune in opposition to Pluto. So go back and check that out. But I will be following up probably tomorrow with a video on Venus's opposition with Pluto, which is coming through by Thursday of this week. That's going to be the 24th. So those are some big astrological pieces that are shifting. Mercury is also turning direct this week. Yay, that was a long Mercury retrograde, it felt like. And then we also very slowly have Mars coming into opposition with Saturn and a square with Uranus. So we're getting like a T-square between Mars, Saturn, and Uranus. That's a really big transit that we will be taking a look at this week as well, and probably into next week. And then there's a couple of Q&A episodes that I have lined up for this week, including one on the whole controversy over, whether or not you should flip the zodiac for the different hemispheres. Okay, so all that being said, what I really want to talk about today in particular is the meaning of the sun in Cancer, or the summer solstice point. Why is it an important point within the philosophical language of astrology? So I'm actually going to use an astronomy program to show you guys what makes this unique. Now remember, this is Northern Hemisphere centric, but the answer you will hear me give again and again is that this language is not causal, it is oracular, which means that it's symbolic and divinatory. You'll hear me say this again and again. The whole system of astrology is a symbolic, geocentric, divinatory language that spirit speaks through. And it's not meant to be taken as something too literal, as in all of the planets are literally causing everything to happen. For me, in the way that I practice and the underlying philosophy that I adhere to, that would be like saying that pulling a tarot card causes something to happen. So the movements in the sky can be a little bit more, can be tempting for us to believe that they have specific causal power. And in a sense, all omens and symbols do have a kind of causal power, although it's sort of acausal or synchronistic. People have, different ways of talking about that. But you could watch a video that I did last week about, what would astrology be hypothetically if we moved to Mars? Would there be a different astrology? And I sort of talk about the epistemology of divination in general. All of that being said, again, this language that I'm about to unpack, yes, it's rooted in the view of the sky from the Northern Hemisphere, but to me, that's just fine. There's no actual problem with that. So you can take this as a metaphor, a symbolic or archetypal language. The experience, the underlying experience that these symbols point to that we're going to unpack today are universal, and they're applicable all throughout the year. In every day, actually, these kinds of symbols and themes come up. So they're not just rooted in like a time of year where the sun is causing something to happen. That's not how this works, in my humble opinion. So, okay, here is my astronomy program. This is called Starry Night Pro. And here is I've artificially made the daytime sky dark so that you can see the constellations here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, as I'm filming this. What I want to point out is this green path that you're seeing here. That's the ecliptic, or what we call the zodiac. You're looking at a sidereal view, not a tropical view. And there's a whole video that we could do on the difference between sidereal and tropical zodiacs as well. Again, my simple opinion about that is both zodiacs work because this is divination. So at any rate, and that might sound flippant. There's a lot to unpack there, but something that's a little too hard to get into in just one video. Okay, so anyway, what I want to point out is that as we are at the summer solstice, basically what you're seeing is you're looking at the sun at the position of high noon on the longest day of the year, solar year, from the Northern Hemisphere. When it gets to that meridian line, you can see it moving and it's going to cross that meridian line. When it gets there on this day of the year, essentially the arc of that green line that you're seeing, the ecliptic, is highest in the sky, which means that the arc is going to take the longest for the sun to travel, creating the longest day. As that's happening, the sun is also closest that it will get in terms of moving up and down to the pole star. So that's that North Star. So at this point in time, the sun has literally, in the solar year, gone up as far away from the southern horizon as it can, as far north as it can get. And then from that point, from this pivotal moment of the longest day of the year, the sun starts to come back down toward the southern horizon, and this arc starts to come back down, and the days will get shorter again. So you can see this if I'm going to advance this, for example, let's say one day or let's say lunar months, and I just advance this, I want you to notice how far the sun comes down. Now, let me just, whoops, I need to move this by hours so that I have the sun in the sky again. Sorry, guys. Actually, it'll work better if I do it by days, won't it? Okay, so let's just do it by days. Okay, so watch what happens. You're going to see the sun every day and the arc, that green arc, coming down in the sky. See how the sun is descending toward the southern horizon? So that also means that the green arc is essentially getting shorter in the sky, you could say. That it takes less time for the sun to travel that arc, for the sun to move through from east to west. So at any rate, that creates shorter days. And then eventually you get all the way down to the very end of the year, which is going to be our winter solstice. That's 0 Capricorn, the opposite sign to Cancer. And by the time we get there, look at how low that arc is in the sky. That kind of illustrates my point right there. So it just zips across the sky a lot faster, and it's a lot closer down to the southern horizon. It's closer to the Earth from our perspective. So all of this has super important symbolic meaning. And that's what I want to take just a minute to unpack right now. So first of all, one of the things to know about Cancer is that it was called the gateway of man. In the ancient world, this sign, or this portal of the summer solstice area of the year, from the Northern Hemisphere, was an indicator of the beginning of the descent of spirit into matter. And interestingly, of course, in horoscopic astrology in the Hellenistic world, this sign is ruled by the moon and is also called the exaltation of Jupiter. There's some very interesting reasons for that. This world that we live in was often referred to as the sublunary sphere, or the sphere below the moon being the planet that was thought of as closest to us. Surprisingly, that's actually true. So if you consider the moon a planet, as we do in astrology, so this celestial object is the closest to us. It's the fastest moving. And anything below the earth below the moon was said to take part was a part of the realm of, generation and decay and death, regeneration, decay, death. So coming into being and passing out of being, this material energy, this kind of material soup, is a very particular kind of substance within the cosmos, or within the picture of reality that the ancients had. And the descent of spirit into matter could also be, think of it as that the soul descends into a body in the sublunary sphere, where it will live a life. It will be born, it will gestate inside of its mother, it will be born, it will come into the world, it will live a life, it will eventually experience, old age, disease, and death. And then the cycle repeats. Many ancient traditions said that if the soul had not sort of evolved and grown spiritually, that it would not be able to go past the moon after its death, and would then regenerate and essentially transmigrate, start a new body in a new lifetime. So it's so interesting that the sign on the summer solstice, where the light is starting to descend down towards the earth again, that sign was that sign of descent from the peak down into the valley, that was associated with the moon, the planet that was at the threshold between the celestial spheres and the sublunary earthy domain of coming to be and passing away, of generation and death. So just kind of taking all of that into account, you have to remember that the ancient philosophy of astrology is built on this idea of there being a dichotomy between spirit and matter. And they're both, again, certainly in the Bhakti tradition, we talk about them both as divine energies, not like one is bad and one is good. But the potential of the sublunary sphere, of the lunar dimension, is to forget your divine nature, to forget your source. And so the impetus of all, spiritual practices is to remember. And the moon, not surprisingly, is the planet of both sleep, forgetting, kind of like an intoxicated slumber, as well as a planet of memory and remembering and nurturing, or fostering and devoting oneself to something because of a constant remembrance. Like the mother fosters the life and health of a child by constantly remembering and nurturing it. Similarly, in all spiritual practices, most spiritual practices will have some dimension of it that is talked about as devotional, meaning that there's a tending to your spiritual life, there's a care for your spiritual life, and there's a constant need to remember. In the practice of Krishna consciousness, Bhakti Yoga, we often say there's two rules: always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna. That's a lunar practice. Not surprisingly, it's Krishna, an avatar meaning the one who descends, is also ruled by the moon. So the sublunary sphere, we descend here and we have to remember who we are while we're here. It's a special kind of realm where it's very easy to fall asleep in the shadows, in the temporary illusion of materiality. We get caught up thinking everything here will last forever. It doesn't. It doesn't mean it's not divine, special, beautiful, but it doesn't last. So if we forget that, then we fall asleep in the shadows and reflections. The moon is a planet of reflected light, not original light, but reflected light. Similarly, we live in this world with a memory of where we come from. The alchemists said that was a silvering of consciousness, that was a necessary part of the eventual alchemical gold of, you might say, in enlightenment. So we have to be able to look around the world and understand this world in terms of generation and decay, in terms of changing and impermanence and flux, in terms of the reflection and the potential for illusion. And we have to stay in constant remembrance of who we are and what is real. All of these things are implied by the temple of the moon and the sign that starts with the descent of the light down toward the sublunary sphere, the gateway of man, the birth of the spirit into body. So the alchemical union between spirit and matter is also talked about in all traditions. Not surprisingly, the very next sign in zodiacal order is Leo, the sign of the sun. So the sun's and moon's signs are placed together. They're also placed together in the springtime when the light first appears in zodiacal speak. Aries, the exaltation of the sun. Taurus, the next sign, the exaltation of the moon. So the sun and moon are paired together. And there's a promise that if you remember, if you silver your consciousness, if you use astrology to see the forms, to see the eternal, the eternal forms, the eternal Ade, like a Platonic, in a Platonic sense, if you're looking at the world and you're seeing it shimmering with these unchanging, eternal symbols. Okay, so for Father's Day, let me tell you the story. Yesterday, was like, what do you want to do for Father's Day? And I was really thinking about it, and I was like, what would I really want to do? But that, the kids might like too. Like, it's not just okay. So here's I was like, I want to watch The Karate Kid, and I want to have root beer floats. I was like, that was my big day. I was like, okay, root beer floats and Karate Kid. We watched The Karate Kid that has Will Smith's son in it. I forget his name. I think it's Jaden, maybe. Anyway, it was a while ago, and Jackie Chan is the Mr. Miyagi character. And this one takes place in China. But it was so funny because it was like almost a cookie cutter recurrence of The Karate Kid that I knew with, what's his name? He was Daniel in the movie, but Ralph Macchio, and apparently there's a new TV show that I heard. So I might actually be excited to see the TV show. If you guys have seen it, you have to tell me if it holds up. Not that I really have any time for TV these days, but so at any rate, I was just sitting there going like, why does everyone want the new Star Wars movies to look and feel like the old ones? Why does this movie feel like it's new, but it feels so much storyline, similar arcs, similar, twists and turns, similar scenes? Why does it feel so much like the old Karate Kid? Because some things never change. And some things that's archetypes. It's the same story rearranged in a lot of different ways. When I did my master's degree and an MFA in creative writing and in English literature and literary theory and stuff like that. And, I was into Joseph Campbell at the time too. And, I remember, partially in some of my graduate classes, trying to bring in this, like the mystical dimension of these literary archetypes. Like these are these eternal forms, and and people were not having it. Like that's not where we're going with this literary criticism that we're doing. We're talking about Derrida or whatever the case might have been. So, and I was like, really, my studies of like English literature, what was so interesting about it for me was that it was dovetailing with the beginning of my interest in astrology. And it was really kind of my initiation into archetypes. At any rate, these archetypes recur over and over again. They recur. And the point is that, just like the moon is always cycling, moon is changing its phases, but the cycle itself has all of these familiar turning points. And that was what the moon ruled, the realm of fortune, this world of coming to be and passing away. And the soul experiencing those things can take joy in them if it understands the eternal nature of the dance that it's a part of. If it doesn't, it gets seized by them. And it's like the gods become like puppeteers, and we lose our agency. We lose agency entirely, which is why the planets are sometimes called grahas, grabbers, or it can also point to grasping something, as in to comprehend something. The stars, wandering stars, they can point to a kind of aimlessness, and sometimes the wandering stars, the planes aster, it could even refer to someone who is like exploiting aimless, stupid people, like a false prophet or something like that. So the gods are, if we're not consciously participating, we're just in a body, and all of these forces of material nature just being pulled along in this grand, Shakespearean merry-go-round. And it's just like, well, if you're not conscious for it, you'll go mad because you're not really in control. This is this play is being conducted by laws of nature that are, that they're on like they're just as tight as a musical scale, and they're just as cyclical as a clock. So, if you don't have awareness within that, it's really kind of a description of torture. So the moon also throughout astrological history has been, defined in that way. My favorite of the Narnia Chronicles, I'm just finally getting back on track, reading Narnia Chronicles to my daughters. Maybe I'll get a new Narnia sign for my back door at some point. I got to ask the girls for one. But we're reading The Silver Chair. It's the moon's book. the hero of the book, heroine, I should say, Jill, she stands in Aslan's country, which is like a celestial realm. It's higher than the sublunary sphere. And he gives her instructions and he says, don't forget the signs. There's going to be signs down there in Narnia once you descend, but the air is thicker and denser and you'll be prone to forgetting things. So don't forget the signs because they'll lead you through your adventure and, kind of guide you home. What happens when she gets into Narnia? She keeps forgetting the signs and she ends up having to save a prince who's forgotten his identity. So this is these mystical metaphors, these lunar mystical metaphors have been around a long time. The moon, remembrance, nurturing, care, or the potential to be exploited by these energies that capture us in temporary illusions. Similarly, Maya can mean either illusion or mercy. So when we see the world as the play of the divine, it leads us home, and it's very merciful and amazing and beautiful, and it captures our mind and spirit in a way that nothing else can. If we forget, the very same energy tangles us up in the machinery of fate, and it feels very cruel and unfortunate. So consciousness is paramount. This is why every day on my channel, I always pound on the same thing. We have to have daily remembrance. What is your daily remembrance? How are you remembering today? What are you doing? At any rate, Cancer, also the exaltation of Jupiter. Why would Jupiter be exalted in this sign? Well, this is the one Jupiter, the one who brings order out of chaos. In the I Ching, there is a hexagram that I really love, number 3. And I've been getting it a lot since moving, because we've been moving in, and gosh, moving in makes me feel like what a house of cards I've been living in. Like what a sham. like what an illusion that I thought my life was together and organized, and it was had some semblance of sanity, because once you see all of your stuff in boxes, it's not organized, it's cluttered, you see all this stuff. What was I doing? Why was I keeping this? What did I think what was going to happen with this someday or whatever? And then you realize how long it takes to build this little nest and how quickly, this nest could be completely swept away. For example, as Venus in Cancer is opposing Pluto in Capricorn, there was also a bird nest outside of our home that got torn apart. And there was a tree that fell down right almost on the neighbor's house in a storm that happened yesterday. And I just kept thinking, yeah, it could all fall apart at any moment. And so I don't know, as I've been moving in, although I'm not superstitious and I don't sit around living in fear, it's just been this awareness of how, they say that moving is one of the more stressful experiences that and not talking about major traumatic experiences, but kind of like your everyday traumatic stuff that people often go through. And one of them at the top of the list is apparently moving. And I get it, because it's really, it makes you feel for a long time like you're uprooted psychically, emotionally, psychologically, and then you have to deal with stuff. And there's so much that we attach to objects. Cancer is an interesting sign because it often, is like how do we create a temporary feeling of homeostasis in this world? And let me tell you, a Cancer as the sign of remembrance, devotional, spiritual remembrance is one thing, but sentimental attachments that try to create some kind of temporary nest to live in, boy, that is a tenuous. That's a very uncertain place to try to live. It's a very vulnerable place. And I find that, for myself as someone with Cancer Sun and Mercury in Cancer, that it's really important that there be a psychic sense of home and not just one that's, patched together out of stuff and out of emotional sentiments and so forth, even though I'm certainly not, not saying that isn't important as well. But at any rate, transitional space. The third hexagram of the I Ching is called difficulty at the beginning. And one of the images of the hexagram is that of in kind of like in the beginning, there was, floods and rain, and, like the earth was being flooded with water. And then gradually out of the, tumultuous cesspool, storming cesspool of water started to emerge like this incredible range of species and life and microbes, and there was this intense struggle for things to come into being out of chaos. And what I love about Jupiter being exalted in this water sign is that obviously Jupiter is a planet of abundance that is very much about growth, life. You'll often see, things like money growing or babies growing or marriages and promotions and things like that when Jupiter comes around, because it makes things grow. But also the great challenge of, it's kind of like, what's that phrase? More money, more problems, I think was that like an album at some point? I don't know. Anyway, so, or maybe it was a movie. I seem to remember it from my childhood somehow. But at any rate, the idea that when there's a lot of growth, there's also a lot of chaos that comes in the beginning. As, case in point, having two kids. Like, I would say that the first month or two after each child came home was brimming with joy, but also brimming with chaos and finding a new rhythm and exhaustion and struggle. And that kind of tempest of life and growth and looking for stability and unity and order at those initial stages, that's really what hexagram 3 of the I Ching is capturing in many ways. So it's this archetypal stage as well that Cancer inherently has something to do with the chaos of things coming to be and gestating, and the vulnerability of that stage and the chaos and the need for for unity and order to grow in and through it. And I'm not talking about some kind of law giving, all right, like let's get this soupy chaotic mess out of the way, like some kind of frustration, anger toward the feminine, or frustration with feminine chaos or something like that. I'm not going in that direction with this, but I am saying that, archetypally, there's this stage where, as life is appearing and emerging, and gestating and changing, there's a need for protection around it. Just like the womb, holds, it kind of binds together the space in which the gestation can occur. We have to look for spaces in order to create that unity. So not surprisingly, Jupiter is exalted in this sign, this very fertile water sign, and a place of growth, and also a place that always is looking for that underlying sense of unity, order, safety. So really interesting, kind of planetary symbolism involved with the sign as well. So at any rate, I hope that these musings were interesting and helpful for you today as you're considering this change in zodiacal movement. Again, it does not matter where these archetypes that we're pointing to as the sun ingresses into Cancer could come into your life as the sun moves into Cancer in any area of your chart in any part of the world, because they're archetypal and they're timeless. And these things, although they're linked to the seasonal metaphors and the change of light and stuff like that, they can take place at any time whatsoever, in any situation whatsoever. And they tend to be constants in our experiences every single day. So I think it'll probably be on Wednesday of this week that I have a video on should we flip the zodiacs or not. And I'll sort of follow up with more on this particular question of the hemispheres and flipping the zodiac and whatnot. But for today, I just wanted to talk about the solstice and the meaning of sun in Cancer and the sign of Cancer in general. So I hope you enjoyed it. Get some good thoughts, stirring upstairs. And let me know your thoughts. If you're a Cancer, if you have Cancer energy in your chart, how do you experience this sign and energy? I'd love to hear your deeper insights. Please feel free to leave it in the comments section below. And I look forward to more this week soon. All right, take care, everyone. Bye.